Lake Trasimeno in Umbria, the largest lake in Italy south of the River Po. This is where Carthaginian commander Hannibal annihilated Roman legions more than 2,000 years ago. Nearby is the city of Perugia and Assisi, where St. Francis founded a religious order that changed the world. Florence is 2 hours' drive to the north. Umbria's countryside has been celebrated by poets and painters for centuries. This is Panicale in Umbria, where the Irish Brigade came in June 1944 after the Allied breakthrough at Cassino. I am Richard O'Sullivan, and this is part 6 of All My Brothers, the story of the Irish Brigade in the Second World War. After the Battle of Cassino, Allied armies were delayed by the Hitler Line 5 miles to the north. This was broken on the 23rd of May by the 1st Canadian Corps, supported by the North Irish Horse. Allied forces started to break out from Anzio on the same day. Their opponents across Italy began withdrawing to the north. The 78th Division, including the Irish Brigade, joined the advance along the Liri Valley on the 26th of May. They followed Highway 6 towards Ceprano, captured by Canadian troops on the 28th of May.
We halted that night round a road junction 5 miles from Ceprano, where we took over positions from the Irish Regiment of Canada. One incident remains fresh in my mind, that of a Canadian standing at the junction calling, "Canadian Irish this way, English Irish that way."
After Ceprano, the Irish Brigade left Highway 6 to clear the way to Frosinone. The roads were narrow and unmetalled. In places, they had been dynamited. There were mines, booby traps and enemy outposts that sometimes had to be outflanked in cross-country attacks. The brigade clashed with rearguards at Strangolo Gali, Hill 255 and San Giovanni. On the 31st of May, the Irish Brigade reached Ripi. It has commanding views towards Frosinone, 6 miles to the northwest. For a week, it went into reserve. Rome was liberated on the 4th of June, but there was a new Allied priority. On 6th of June 1944, the invasion of France began with landings in Normandy. The Italian campaign was overshadowed by the battle in northwest Europe, Soviet advances on the Eastern Front, and the struggle with the Empire of Japan in the Far East. Resources were diverted from Italy to other theatres of the war. General Alexander, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied armies in Italy, received orders to pursue the retreating German army. The target for the 5th Army, under General Mark Clark, was Pisa. For the 8th Army, under General Oliver Leese, it was Florence. There were hopes the war in Italy would be over by Christmas. The Irish Brigade rejoined the northward advance on Thursday the 8th of June.
Mile after mile lay the smouldering, capsized wrecks of what had once been transport vehicles and tanks. Mile after mile, their drivers had to struggle on, while our airmen sat up there in the sky, watching and obliterating anything that moved.
We finished the day by attacking a farmhouse on a hill, where we found the bodies of a grandfather, father, and grandson, a mere boy, who had been shot for allegedly waving at the advancing British tanks. I comforted the grieving women and conveyed the bodies to the nearest cemetery.
The next day, the brigade passed through the northern suburbs of Rome. Travelling up the valley of the River Tiber, it reached San Oreste. The town was the former headquarters of German Supreme Commander in Italy, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring.
A most astonishing place, this German HQ. It was in a series of tunnels burrowed out of the hillside. The Germans had set fire to as much as possible before leaving, and the atmosphere of smoke in most of the tunnels was pretty suffocating.
The Irish Brigade liberated the German High Command's wine and liquor stores. The Irish Brigade pressed on along the Tiber. It crushed rearguard resistance at Civitella on the 12th of June and reached Tordemonte at the confluence of the Tiber and the River Paglia 2 days later. The brigade bypassed Orvieto and crossed the Paglia. On the 14th of June, the London Irish captured the hilltop village of Murano, which overlooked Highway 71, the brigade's route north. Some thought the enemy was on the run. They were wrong. On the 16th of June, a platoon of Fogs with tank support entered the hilltop town of Città della Pieve on Highway 71. It was withdrawn after meeting resistance. Paratroopers retook the town that evening and held it for almost 2 days. 78th Division Commander General Charles Keatley investigated the delay in the advance. His binoculars were shot from his hands as he was studying the town. I am at Città della Pieve, and I shall now read a passage from Fling Our Banner to the Wind, which was written by John Horsfall, who in June 1944 was commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion London Irish Rifles. The Para's defence of Città della Pieve delayed the attack at Trasimeno by several priceless days. I have often thought it affected the whole course of the war. With the main road north blocked, the brigade was ordered along an unmetalled road that bypassed Città. The Fogs led the way. They were attached to a mobile battle group under the command of 56th Recce Regiment. It also comprised a squadron of tanks, an artillery battery and 2 anti-tank troops. It was named Chavasse Force after the commander of the 56th, Kendall Chavasse. He was originally a Fogs officer and from County Waterford. Chavasse had won the DSO in Tunisia and a second one at the Battle for Termoli in October 1943. Chavasse force pushed through the hills south of Lake Trasimeno. It concentrated around Castello Montelara, on a high point close to its southern shores on the 19th of June. The London Irish and the Skins, meanwhile, concentrated at Tavernelle on the Torrente River south of the hilltop town of Panicale. The Germans finally evacuated Città early on the 18th of June. This allowed the 11th and the 36th Brigades of the 78th Division to follow Highway 71 towards Trasimeno. But by then, the Germans had established the Trasimeno Line, also known as the Albert Line. It extended across the Italian peninsula, from Trasimeno to the Tyrrhenian Sea in the west, and the Adriatic coast to the east. It was designed to delay the Allied advance, and allow more time for the construction of the Gothic Line, a more formidable defensive line in mountains south of the River Po. The Trasimeno Line was nevertheless strong and deep. Its strongest point was wooded countryside between Trasimeno and Lake Chiusi that was directly in the path of the 78th Division's line of advance. 36th Brigade attacked east of Lake Chusey on the 19th of June and was repulsed. It launched a fresh attack the following day, while 11th Brigade attacked a ridge close to Lake Trasimeno. Its strong point was the village of San Fertuccio. Brigadier Scott and Lieutenant Colonel Horsfall spent the 20th of June at Montellara and Panicale watching the attack unfold. By the evening, the Trasimeno line was still intact. The Irish Brigade was given the task of completing the job the next day. The plan called for the London Irish to lead the attack against San Fertuccio. The Skins were to follow up, while the Fogs were to be in reserve at Montellara. At 2:15 on the morning of Midsummer's Day, the London Irish travelled by troop carriers from Tavernale past Panicale and then downhill on the road to San Fertuccio. They got out and marched to the village of Machi for breakfast. In darkness before dawn, E Company, followed by F Company, set off by foot with a squadron of tanks from the 11th Canadian Armoured Regiment. 0 hour was 7:30 in the morning. The attack started from the railway line at the base of San Fertuccio Ridge. There was no preparatory barrage, as the Lancashire Fusiliers, part of 11th Brigade, were too close to German positions. Under the cover of smoke, E and F companies, supported by tanks, attacked San Fertuccio. Both companies were shelled and met machine gun fire as they advanced. In San Fertuccio, the fighting was house to house. An observation post in the church tower directed enemy artillery fire. It was destroyed by tank fire. San Fertuccio was taken by 1 o'clock in the afternoon. G and H companies took over the attack 90 minutes later. They headed for San Felice Church, north of San Fertuccio, following a bombardment by the division's artillery. It took more than an hour for the London Irish and Canadian tanks to blast the opponents out of the building. H Company commander Desmond Woods was wounded in the leg by a stick grenade and mentioned in dispatches. H Company occupied the adjacent cemetery and turned it into a fortress. A counterattack was launched. Fighting roared along the cemetery wall. Lieutenant Michael Webb Bowen raised his head to see the attackers. He came face to face with a German officer with a pistol. Webb Bowen fired first. The attack was repulsed. These bullet holes on the walls of San Felice Cemetery are evidence of the fighting here, with the London Irish Rifles on the inside of the cemetery and the German forces counter-attacking from the outside. Covered by fire from the 25-pounders of the 17th Field Regiment and medium howitzers, F Company, under Major Colin Gibbs, advanced to a crossroads and farm buildings beyond San Felice. E Company pushed downhill towards the lake and the village of Pucciarelli. They were met by a hail of shells and a new counterattack. The Skins, commanded by John Kerr, who had been Company Sergeant Major less than 2 years earlier, joined the attack at 5 o'clock and fought their way into Pucciarelli. House-to-house fighting continued in the village for most of the night. London Irish Colour Sergeant Ted O'Sullivan brought up E Company's evening meal.
I was serving it up, helped by the stretcher bearers, when a burst of machine gun fire shattered the lintel above my head. The Germans had our range to perfection. I persuaded a party consisting of my driver and the stretcher bearers to dash with empty food containers for the jeep 20 yards away. A shell burst right outside the door, killing one and wounding the other of the first pair. The corpse was placed on top of the folded windscreen on the bonnet. We roared down a 100-yard track and were followed all the way by mortar fire. Both back wheels were punctured, and the Jeep was running on its back rims.
The London Irish lost almost 80 men on the 21st of June. 9 supporting tanks were knocked out. The Skins were in Pucciarelli, but their opponents hadn't withdrawn. The writer Eric Linklater reported on the aftermath of the fighting at San Fituccio and around San Felice Church.
In the ruins of what had been a little country church, about half a dozen soldiers were sitting on a pile of rubbish. They were dirty and dishevelled, and their cheeks were grey, partly with dust and partly with the weariness of battle. I said to them, "I suppose you're feeling well pleased with yourselves?" "Feeling bloody sorry for ourselves," was the answer I got.
At dawn the next day, the Germans tried to retake Pucciarelli. C Company commander, Captain Percy Hamilton, a veteran of Irish Brigade battles in Tunisia, Sicily, the Adriatic and Cassino, led Skins fighting west of the village. Hamilton was awarded the Military Cross for his leadership in the fighting at Pucciarelli on the 22nd of June. By midday, the Skins and the London Irish had linked up. That evening, F Company of the London Irish advanced 400 yards to capture Casa Montanara, a large farm complex. The brigade spent the next day preparing for a fresh attempt to break the German line. It began at dawn on the 24th of June with a massive artillery barrage. Casa Montanara had been held by F Company of the London Irish for 36 hours. The targets of the bombardment included German positions only yards away. Its commander, Major Colin Gibbs, was given the option of pulling out before the shelling started. John Horsfall reported what Gibbs said in his book, "Fling Our Banner to the Wind."
You must begin with the barrage on this place, but we would like to stay. It has good cellars, and we'll go into them at 0. I'd rather know it was our guns than be out there in the open under their counter-preparation. And so it came about that an Irish Rifles Company commander with a subaltern, a handful of NCOs and 30-odd riflemen elected to stay in their posts when the whole of the division's artillery put down their wrath upon them. I went back thoughtfully to my command post, wondering who I would see of F Company next morning.
Gibbs and his company survived. He was awarded the Military Cross for his bravery. The Fogs took the lead. Its objectives included the hamlets of Pescia and Ranciano, about a mile further north. B and C companies advanced with tank support. 2 Skins companies joined the assault. Fighting in heat, dust and smoke, their objectives were secured by early afternoon. Fogs Fusilier William Hobden, a Dubliner who was C Company's wireless operator, looked into a house. He found 7 armed opponents. Hobden brought his wireless set to the on-guard position and pointed the aerial at them. Brigadier Scott wrote later,
Goodness knows what they thought he had on, but they dropped their weapons and surrendered to a man. One up to Dublin.
Hobden was awarded the military medal. The Irish Brigade had captured most objectives by nightfall. 36th Brigade took over the advance. There was a final drama. On the morning of the 25th of June, Fogs commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Dunnell, set off in a tank to forward units near Ranciano and Pescia. He was accompanied by the battalion's intelligence officer and the battery commander attached to the Fogs. They took a wrong turning and drove into enemy lines. Dunnell and his colleagues were taken prisoner. The brigade's prisoners were marched into Panicali. A German officer who spoke English asked a Fogs Fusilier from Dublin why he was fighting in the British Army. "Sure, we didn't want to see the English get beat," was the reply. The Battle of Lake Trasimeno was the second time the Irish Brigade had been in the vanguard of the 78th Division's assault on a major enemy defensive line in little more than a month. It lost more than 200 killed, wounded or taken prisoner. Most of those in the brigade who died are buried in the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery near Oviedo in the Pagliar Valley. The 78th Division was pulled out of the line at the end of June. The 3 battalions of the Irish Brigade moved to east of Rome. Pat Scott set up the brigade headquarters in the luxury Hotel Eden, close to the Spanish Steps, in the heart of the Eternal City. He founded a Shamrock Club to provide meals to members of the brigade visiting Rome. At the Barberini Palace, now Italy's National Gallery of Ancient Art, the Irish Brigade held a ball on the evening of the 8th of July. It was attended by 400 people, including as many women as Pat Scott could find. The evening culminated with energetic Irish dancing.
In every way, our visit to Rome had been a success. One thing only cast a shadow towards the end of our stay. It was the tragic news that the 6 Inniskillings were to be disbanded. It was all a question of manpower, and gradually the War Office was disbanding all war-formed battalions. At first we're inclined to look upon the thing as another injustice to Ireland, but I am satisfied that this was not so.
The battalion was replaced by the Skins 2nd Battalion, a regular army unit that had seen action across the world, including France, Sicily and at Anzio. It was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Bobby Scott. Most members of 6 Skins, including Percy Hamilton, transferred to the 2nd Battalion. 6 Skins commander John Kerr became ill, but he was to return to the brigade in the autumn. Captain Geoffrey Hinkston, who had won a military cross with the 2nd Skins in Sicily, penned a poem of lament for the end of the 6th Skins.
We mourn our loss, but through the sweet refrains of our sad Londonderry air come stealing all the skirling savage strains of Ireland's battle songs, the songs you played and sang. And where those Irish songs are ever heard, no Inniskillings can forget the way you fought and how your voices rang. And as our rolling drums pay out your soul, proudly we add your honours to our scroll.
There were other changes. John Horsfall became commander of the Fogs. He was replaced as commander of the London Irish by Lieutenant Colonel Breedon. Known as Bala, he had led the Skins in the Liry Valley in May, where he had been wounded and awarded the Distinguished Service Order. Originally a Royal Ulster Rifles officer, Breedon commanded the London Irish until the end of the war. While the rest of the 8th Army continued its advance north, the Irish Brigade travelled south by train to Taranto, where it landed on the Italian mainland for the first time almost 10 months earlier. The 1st Battalion of the London Irish Rifles, which had fought in Anzio, was disembarking from the ship that the 2nd Battalion was boarding at the same time. Both were wearing carbines and distinctive hackles. "Same regiment, different battalions," Ted O'Sullivan called out as an explanation to mystified sailors. The Irish Brigade arrived in Alexandria on the 22nd of July. It travelled to El Kasassin, between Cairo and Ismailia on the Suez Canal. At the start of August, the brigade moved back to the Nile Delta and stayed at Sidi Bish, 10 miles east of Alexandria. The plan was for the Irish Brigade to spend 2 to 3 months training, perhaps in the mountains of Palestine and Syria. They were considered to be similar to northern Italy.
However, all this proved too good to be true. We hadn't been in the country a fortnight before we were told we had to go back to Italy as soon as possible. Fortunately, as soon as possible was in about a month's time. As that month went on, with its tide of good news on the Western Front, people really did begin to think we might get stuck in Egypt if the war ended too quickly. By the middle of August, everyone was getting quite keen to go. A protracted stay in the Middle East appealed to no one.
Not everyone could return to Italy. Ted O'Sullivan had contracted an ear infection after swimming in the polluted waters of Alexandra Stanley Bay. He suffered a recurrence of malaria as well. Ted was too ill to sail with the brigade and spent weeks in hospital. He was regularly weighed. Despite extra rations, Ted remained only 7 stone 13 pounds. It would take him more than 3 months to recover his strength and get back to the London Irish. On the 11th of September 1944, the Irish Brigade left Alexandria for Taranto. Spirits were high. They'd been reinforced. Paris had been liberated the previous month. The Red Army had reached Warsaw. Poland's capital had risen in rebellion. German cities were being heavily bombed. The Third Reich seemed to be on its last legs. The Irish Brigade returned to Italy in September 1944. Their destination was the Gothic Line north of Florence. And that's where I'm going next, for part 7 of All My Brothers, the story of the Irish Brigade in the Second World War.